I wore a bikini for the first time in 10 years and cried tears of joy, but the tears weren't just for the sun on my skin or the sand between my toes. They were tears of goodbye. Goodbye to a decade of shadows, a decade of hiding in baggy clothes, becoming the official photographer of all the happy moments at the beach, but never a participant. I was there, but at the same time, I wasn't. My body had become an invisible cage, and the key, I thought, had been thrown away forever. If that feeling of being a spectator of your own life, sounds familiar to you, I beg you, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because the journey I'm about to tell you about isn't about losing weight. It's about finding yourself. The scene that haunts me is not a scene of great drama. It's silent, almost mundane. A Tuesday afternoon, the merciless light of a store dressing room. I had picked up a dress, a size larger than I usually wore. Then, unwilling to admit defeat, I picked up another one, 2 sizes larger. Neither fit. The zipper wouldn't go up. The fabric pulled at my hips, my arms. And in that mirrored solitude, under a light that seemed designed to expose every flaw, I didn't feel anger. I felt something much worse, a kind of resignation, a silent mourning for the woman I used to be, the woman who bought clothes for pleasure, not out of necessity, the woman who moved through the world with a lightness I could barely remember. At that moment, the problem wasn't the dress. The problem was that I no longer recognized myself. It was as if my true essence was buried under layers of something that wasn't mine. Tiredness, frustration, and a weight that wasn't just physical. It was the weight of unfulfilled expectations, of promises I had broken to myself. That dressing room was my lowest point, but it was also my starting point, because there, in that little cubicle, I realized that the story I had been telling myself was wrong. The story that it was my fault, my lack of willpower, my laziness, was a lie, a convenient lie that the weight loss industry has been telling us for decades. I wasn't weak. I was fighting the wrong war with the wrong weapons against an enemy I didn't even know existed. Looking back, the erosion of my confidence was a slow, almost imperceptible process, like the tide rising. It started in my early 20s, a pound here after the holidays, another there after a stressful period at work. I made excuses. "It's my age," I said. "My metabolism is changing. It's normal after having children." Each excuse was a small shovel of sand that I threw over my intuition, that little voice that whispered that something was out of alignment. I became an expert at ignoring the signs, the clothes that were starting to feel tight, the energy that drained away in the middle of the afternoon, the need for an extra coffee just to function. I adapted. I bought pants with elastic waistbands. I traded a day at the beach for a movie on the couch. I called it maturing, having other priorities. But the truth is, I was retreating, giving up territory little by little to a silent invader. And the worst part is that I tried to fight it. Oh, how I tried. My diet history read like an encyclopedia of failure. I tried the low-carb diet, where I dreamed about bread and felt perpetually irritable and slow thinking. I lost a few pounds, yes, but I gained it all back, and then some as soon as I ate the first slice of pizza. I tried counting calories, turning every meal into a stressful math equation, feeling guilty for every extra spoonful. I tried the natural approach, eating only real food, but my weight stubbornly refused to budge. Each attempt was a vicious cycle of hope, effort, and disappointment. I pushed myself, starved myself, exercised until I was exhausted, and the result, minimal, temporary, and frustrating. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. The harder I tried, the emptier I felt. With each failure, the voice of self-criticism grew louder. "You can't do it. You have no discipline. Other women can do it. Why can't you?" I was stuck in a cycle of shame and self-sabotage without realizing that the problem wasn't my effort. The problem was the bucket. The bucket was fundamentally broken. I was trying to fix the symptom, the weight on the scale, without ever understanding the root cause, the real reason why my body seemed to have turned against me. That woman in the dressing room didn't know it yet, but she was about to throw out all the rules and start an investigation. A journey to discover why, for so many of us, the path to wellness seemed like a maze with no way out, and the answer I would find would change not only my body, but my perception of everything. The last straw was a photograph, a photo from a family birthday, one of those candid shots where no one is posing. And there I was, in the corner, laughing at some joke. But it wasn't my laughter that shocked me. It was my face, swollen, tired. There was a deep disconnect between the joy of the moment and the image reflected back at me. That wasn't me, or rather, it was a version of me that I didn't want to accept as definitive. That's when the switch flipped. Sadness gave way to a cold, focused anger. An anger not against myself for the first time, but against misinformation, against empty promises, against the system that keeps us sick and guilty. I decided that I would no longer follow any plans, any diets, any gurus. I would become my own expert. I dove into a research rabbit hole that lasted months. I read scientific articles, biology blogs, anonymous discussion forums, endocrinology books. And it was during this immersion that I began to see a pattern emerge, an inconvenient truth hidden beneath the noise of eat less, move more. The first piece of the puzzle was understanding that I wasn't fighting one enemy, but two. The first was obvious, but in a way I didn't expect. The external villain. It wasn't fat or sugar alone. It was the cacophony of contradictory information, a multi-billion-dollar industry that thrives on our confusion. One day, fat is the devil. The next, it's carbohydrates, then gluten, then lactose. We are bombarded with rules that change every season, like fashion. Low-carb, ketogenic, intermittent fasting, paleo. Each one presents itself as the ultimate solution, but the truth is that they distract us from the real problem. This deliberate confusion keeps us in a state of paralysis, jumping from one trench to another in an endless war. But the scariest part of this external villain was more subtle. It wasn't on supermarket shelves, but in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the plastics we use. I discovered the world of endocrine disruptors, chemical compounds found in pesticides, plastics, and cosmetics that mimic our hormones and wreak silent havoc on our system. They confuse our metabolism, tell our bodies to store fat, especially in the belly area, and create low-grade chronic inflammation that leaves us exhausted and bloated. It was as if I was trying to tend a delicate garden while every day someone was secretly spraying poison on it. I could have had the best seeds and the best intentions, but the environment was contaminated. This brought me immense relief. It wasn't just my imagination. There was a real external force working against me. But this also led me to my second and most important discovery, the internal villain. If the external environment was contaminated, how was my body responding to it? I discovered that my metabolism wasn't slow or broken. It was in defense mode. Imagine a city that has endured years of unpredictable attacks, restrictive diets, and subtle poisoning, endocrine disruptors. What is the first thing that city does? It builds walls. It closes its gates. It stores resources. It goes into a state of siege. My body was doing exactly that. Years of yo-yo dieting and chronic stress had taught my metabolism a dangerous lesson. Energy is scarce and danger is constant. Store everything you can. Reduce energy expenditure to a minimum. My body wasn't betraying me. It was trying to protect me based on the terrible information I was unknowingly feeding it. This metabolic memory was the inner villain. My own survival system, taken to the extreme, was now sabotaging my efforts to thrive. Every attempt at a restrictive diet was just another attack that reinforced the need to store fat. Every exhausting workout was a danger signal that made it conserve even more energy. I was at war with myself, and it was a war I could never win, because I was fighting against my body's most fundamental instinct, survival. I didn't need more restriction. I didn't need more struggle. I needed a peace treaty. I needed to signal to my body that the war was over, that the environment was safe, that it could finally let down its walls and start using the energy it had been storing for so long. But how do you send a signal like that? How do you rewrite such a deeply ingrained cellular memory? That question kept me awake at night. The answer wasn't in any popular diet. It was hidden in a much deeper and older corner of science. Have you ever felt at war with your own body? Tell me in the comments what the craziest diet you've ever tried was. It was this search for a signal of peace that took me to the next level of my investigation. I knew that the solution couldn't be another diet, another punishing exercise regimen. That would be like yelling at a scared child to calm down. It doesn't work. The solution had to be something that spoke the language of my body, the language of cells. I started researching cell biology, hormone signaling, and how our bodies evolved to respond to the environment. And that's when I came across a concept that changed everything. It wasn't in a best-selling diet book, but in an obscure article on ethnobotany and the resilience of certain ancestral communities. The article talked about how these populations, despite living in challenging environments, did not suffer from the modern metabolic diseases that afflict us. The secret was not in what they didn't eat, but in what they did eat. Specifically, a variety of rare plants and herbs rich in bioactive compounds that scientists were just beginning to understand. These compounds were not vitamins or minerals in the traditional sense. They acted as signalers, information molecules that, when consumed, interacted with receptors in our cells and gave them new instructions. They could tell a fat cell to release its energy instead of storing it. They could tell a liver cell to activate its detoxification pathways. They could tell the hypothalamus in our brain that the body was nourished and safe, reducing nervous hunger. They were like conductors of an orchestra, restoring harmony to a system that had become chaotic and dissonant. That was my first epiphany. The biological key I was looking for was not a magic formula, but a language, a chemical language that my body understood instinctively. I called these compounds botanical signals. They were the key to unlocking the dormant potential of my own metabolism. But it was during this phase of intense research that something truly extraordinary happened. One night, while browsing an online forum about women's health, one of those anonymous corners of the internet where women share their stories without filters, I came across a post. The title was simple: "Stop Fighting with Your Garden." The post was from a woman who identified herself only as Anna, biologist, and as I read her words, I felt a chill. It was like reading my own diary, but written by someone else. She used the same metaphor I had formulated in my head. She described the female body as an inner garden. Restrictive diets and stress were like prolonged droughts. Endocrine disruptors and processed foods were like weeds and pests. And stubborn weight gain, fatigue, and brain fog, they were the signs of exhausted soil. Soil that, no matter how much you water or fertilize it with the wrong things, simply cannot generate life anymore. She said that the solution was not to pull out the flowers that were still left, but to focus on nourishing the earth, on restoring the microbiota, on calming inflammation, on providing the exact micronutrients that signaled to the entire ecosystem that it was safe to flourish again. I read the post 3 times with tears in my eyes. The validation was overwhelming. I wasn't crazy. My struggle was not unique. That resonance, that narrative echo coming from a stranger thousands of miles away gave me the confidence I lacked. It was proof that I was on the right track. A fundamental truth was emerging, and that truth wasn't about erasing everything we knew. It wasn't everything you know about diet is wrong. Quite the opposite. It was the piece that made everything else make sense. It was the catalyst. Why does exercise sometimes work and sometimes not? Because if your cellular soil is exhausted, exercise is just another stressor, not a stimulus. Why is eating healthy sometimes not enough? Because if the soil is infertile, it cannot absorb and utilize nutrients properly. The botany beacons were the discovery that connected all the dots. They were the treatment for the soil. They prepared the ground so that healthy eating, hydration, and movement could finally work as they should. It didn't feel like I had found a contradiction, but rather that I had found the missing piece of a huge puzzle. Now I understood why all my past efforts had been so frustrating and ineffective. I was trying to plant flowers in concrete. The task was now clear. I needed to find these botany signals. I needed to find a way to nourish my inner soil. But the theory, as beautiful as it was, had to face reality. Where, in my daily life, would I find these rare compounds? How could I turn this knowledge into practical and consistent action? The hope was real, but the path forward was still shrouded in fog. The theory was elegant, the validation was exciting, but I am a practical person. I needed to test this hypothesis. I needed to see if this idea of nourishing the soil worked in the real world, in my body. I began a new phase of research, this time focused on ingredients. What exactly were these botanical signals? The list that emerged was fascinating and a little scary. They were names that sounded exotic, far removed from my reality in the kitchen. L-carnitine, which I discovered is essential for transporting fatty acids into the mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, to be burned as fuel. Tryptophan, an amino acid precursor to serotonin, our happiness hormone, crucial for controlling emotional hunger and anxiety that so often lead us to eat without thinking. Chromium picolinate, a mineral that studies have shown to enhance insulin action, helping to stabilize blood sugar and reduce uncontrollable cravings for sweets. Anhydrous caffeine, a pure and concentrated form that not only increased energy, but also stimulated thermogenesis, the process by which the body burns calories to produce heat. These were powerful compounds, each with a specific function in the metabolic orchestra. My first attempt was naive. I tried to obtain these compounds through food. I researched foods rich in L-carnitine, such as red meat. I tried to increase my intake of tryptophan-rich foods, such as turkey and pumpkin seeds. I sought out sources of chromium, such as broccoli. And of course, I drank my coffee. I became a kitchen chemist, trying to put together this nutritional puzzle on every plate. It was a Herculean effort. And to be honest, the results were subtle. Extremely subtle. After a couple of weeks of diligent effort, I noticed a small change. It wasn't on the scale. The number remained stubbornly the same, but I felt a spark, a slight decrease in bloating at the end of the day, a little less urge to raid the candy cabinet after dinner. One morning, I woke up feeling a little more rested, a little less sluggish. It was almost imperceptible. If I hadn't been actively looking for it, I probably would have overlooked it. But for me at that time, that tiny change was monumental. It was the first green leaf sprouting from the dry earth of my inner garden. It was the first note in tune in my out-of-tune orchestra. It was proof that the theory wasn't just an intellectual fantasy. The principle was correct. My body was responding. It was listening. That small sign of improvement was the fuel I needed. It gave me the strength to keep going, to not give up. But it also presented me with a very clear problem: inconsistency, the difficulty. Getting the right amount of these compounds through food was nearly impossible. One day I would eat more meat, the next less. The amount of chromium in broccoli varies greatly depending on the soil in which it was grown. And to get the dose of L-carnitine that studies showed to be effective, I would have to eat an amount of steak that was impractical and unsustainable. I was making a tremendous effort for minimal results. The green leaf was beautiful, but I didn't want a single leaf. I wanted a blooming garden. I wanted complete transformation. I realized that the natural approach through food, while well-intentioned, had a fundamental flaw in the modern world. Our foods are simply not as potent as they used to be, and our needs, due to stress and exposure to toxins, are greater than ever. The small victory was the validation I needed to confirm the hypothesis. But it was also proof that I needed a more precise, more powerful, and more reliable tool. I needed the concentration and purity that only science could provide. I needed botanical signals in their most effective form, in the exact dose to really make a difference. That small glimpse of improvement, that spark of energy, showed me the way. But it also showed me that I was just getting started. The question was no longer what works, but how to get what works consistently and powerfully enough to bring about the real, lasting change I so desperately sought. That first tiny victory, that feeling of less bloating, gave me a new kind of energy. It wasn't the jittery energy of caffeine, but a calm energy of hope. I was on the right track. Now, the challenge was to turn that dirt track into a paved highway. My search changed focus. I was no longer just looking for theoretical validation. I was looking for proof of effectiveness. With the names of the compounds in hand, L-carnitine, tryptophan, chromium picolinate, anhydrous caffeine, I dove back into the scientific literature, but this time with a different question. What is the dose that works? I began reading not just about what these compounds did, but about the clinical trials, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. And what I found was shocking. The studies that showed significant results, actual weight loss, improved insulin sensitivity, reduced appetite, used very specific and concentrated doses of these ingredients. They were what the scientific community calls a therapeutic dose, the amount needed to produce a real biological effect, not just a nutritional trace. My kitchen chemistry wasn't even close. To achieve the therapeutic dose of L-carnitine used in a study that showed significant improvement in fat burning, I would need to eat almost a pound of red meat per day. For tryptophan, the amount needed to positively impact mood and reduce compulsive eating was much higher than what I could get from a plate of turkey. It was a moment of blinding clarity. My approach was right on the what, but completely wrong on the how much. I would never be able to, through conventional methods, give my body the strong, clear signal it needed to get out of defense mode. It would be like whispering instructions to someone in the middle of a rock concert. The message simply wouldn't get through. It was at that point that the idea of an encapsulated solution went from being a convenience to a logical necessity. It wasn't about taking a shortcut or a magic pill. It was about precision, about effectiveness, about giving my body the exact tool in the exact dose to do the job it already knew how to do. It was the only way to ensure that my inner soil received the concentrated nutrition it needed every day, consistently, to heal and recalibrate. Motivated by this epiphany, my search became even more specific. I was no longer looking for ingredients, but for a formula, a solution that combined these specific botanical signals in the correct therapeutic dose from a pure and reliable source. I began researching laboratories, certifications, and quality standards. I learned the difference between cheap raw materials and pure, potent extracts. I became a supplement detective, and most of what I found disappointed me. Formulas with very low doses, full of fillers, with ingredients of dubious origin. But I persisted, driven by the certainty that the solution existed. I was looking for a needle in a haystack, but I knew what the needle looked like. I knew exactly what it needed to contain. And after weeks of searching, comparing dozens of products, reading every label, and researching every ingredient, I found it. One bottle, one simple label. But when I read the list of ingredients and their concentrations, my heart raced. It was all there. L-carnitine, tryptophan, chromium picolinate, anhydrous caffeine, and not in token doses, but in the exact concentrations I had seen in scientific studies. The formula seemed to have been designed by someone who had been on the same journey of discovery as me. Someone who understood the need for therapeutic dosing. Someone who understood the synergy between the ingredients. That bottle wasn't a vague promise. It was the embodiment of months of my research. It was the precision tool I needed to finally put my hypothesis to the test. I held that bottle in my hands and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't about trying anymore, it was about executing a plan. I had the strategy, I had the knowledge, and now I had the tool. The journey from theory to practice was complete. The next step was simple. Get started. With the bottle in my hand, I felt a calmness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the frantic excitement of a new diet. It was the quiet confidence of a scientist about to begin a well-planned experiment. I started taking the capsules, one in the morning and one in the early afternoon. Exactly as the research suggested was ideal for maintaining energy levels and activating metabolism throughout the day. I didn't change anything else drastically. I continued with my mindful eating, but without the anxiety of restriction. I continued with my walks, but without the pressure of punishing myself at the gym. The only new variable was the formula. The first week, the most noticeable change was my energy. It was a clean, stable energy. The 3 p.m. slump, which was a constant in my life, simply disappeared. I finished my workday with a clear mind. That alone was a victory. In the second week, something new happened. My clothes. The jeans that had always been a little tight at the waist started to feel comfortable. The bloating that I carried like a second skin began to subside. I felt lighter, more agile. And then, at the end of the second week, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I weighed myself, without expectation, just out of curiosity. And when I looked down at the number on the scale, I couldn't believe it. It had only been a few pounds, but to me, it was a ton. Because in recent years, that number had only moved in one direction, up. Seeing it go down so calmly, so effortlessly, was a seismic validation. And it was at that exact moment, looking at that number on the scale, feeling the waistband of my pants looser, that I knew I needed to stop everything and talk to you directly. Because I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It's the story of millions of women who are stuck in the same cycle of guilt and frustration, trying to fix a problem with the wrong tools. Your body is not your enemy. It is an incredibly resilient garden waiting to bloom. But the soil in that garden may be compacted, exhausted, poisoned by years of misinformation and stress. It is in a state of high friction, like a powerful engine running with the handbrake on. You can step on the gas as much as you want, but progress will be slow, frustrating, and exhausting. What I've found is that this precise combination of botanical signals, this formula that activates what I call the cellular oasis effect, is the key that releases that handbrake. It doesn't force the engine. It simply removes the obstacle that prevents it from functioning at its natural fullest. The urgency I feel is not out of fear. It is out of potential. It is the urgency to see you experience this feeling of lightness, of frictionless progress as soon as possible. Every day you spend fighting the wrong war is another day your potential lies dormant. I spent months researching, testing, and feeling like a curator of this information. And that's why I feel morally obligated to tell you. The exact formula I used, the only one I found that combines the right ingredients in the therapeutic doses that science proves, is available to you. I left the link to it in the first pinned comment and also in the description of this video. If my journey resonates with you, if you've seen yourself in the mirror at the store, in a family photo, in the daily struggle against fatigue and frustration, I invite you to give yourself this chance. Subscribe to the channel because your transformation deserves to be shared. After that day on the scale, The journey became a cascade of small joys. The following weeks were a rediscovery. Buying pants in a smaller size, then another, feeling the energy to play with my kids on the floor without back pain, receiving a compliment from a friend. Wow, your face is slimmer. You look so radiant. Every moment was confirmation. The garden was blooming, and then the final test. Summer vacation was approaching, and for the first time in a decade, the idea of going to the beach didn't fill me with panic, but with a timid expectation. I bought a bikini, a simple black one. I didn't hide it in the back of my drawer. I left it out in plain sight as a reminder of my promise. And the day arrived. At the beach, I felt the old fear creeping in, the urge to wrap myself in my towel. But then I looked at the sea, took a deep breath, and remembered everything: the research, the discovery, the validation, the woman in the fitting room, and I took off my towel. The sun touched my belly for the first time in 10 years, and I didn't feel ashamed. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for my body, for its incredible ability to heal itself. Gratitude for my stubbornness, for not accepting defeat. And that's when the tears came. Warm, salty tears that mixed with the sunscreen. They were tears of pure joy, of liberation. I was no longer a spectator. I was there, completely, feeling the sand, the sun, life. That was my story, but it doesn't have to be just mine. Your journey to rediscover the incredible woman you already are, the woman who deserves to feel the joy of the sun on your skin, can start now. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together. Share this video with a friend who you know needs to hear this message. And most importantly, click on the link in the description and in the pinned comment below. Give your inner garden the nourishment it needs to flourish. Give yourself the chance to cry your own tears of joy. You deserve it.